Hey everyone, my name is Ben Scheich. I have been a wedding photographer for the last almost 15 years now. I've photographed millions of wedding photos, hundreds of weddings, and used just about every zoom and prime and focal length out there. So today we're going to be building out the best wedding photography kits. Whether you are new and maybe you have a wedding or two under your belt, or you've been doing it for a decade plus like I have, I still feel like gaining the perspective of someone who has taken, again, millions of wedding photos could be super useful and maybe something you haven't thought about. So we're gonna dive deep into lenses, why to pick each one over another, and how to pair them together to best maximize your kit. Now, right off the bat, this video is sponsored by Sony, and so I want to say a huge thank you to them for supporting me and the channel, and also providing me with a huge slew of lenses to kind of show off and compare and use as my great visual aids for this particular video. Over the past few months, I've been using the Sony Alpha 1, the Alpha 7R4, as well as the new Alpha 7 IV. But one of the things that I was most impressed by in using those cameras was, yes, the cameras are phenomenal, but the lenses were actually very, very, very good, and I feel like are really, really undervalued because the cameras themselves are getting so much hype. I'm overall just really impressed with the amount of image quality and speed that they're able to pack into these tiny little prime lenses, because they are a full frame platform that has a full set of zooms and primes that are all completely native to the Sony E-mounts that don't need adapters or anything like that. That whole ecosystem is just a lot further forward than many of the other systems I've used. So much so, in fact, that many of these lenses are actually already Sony's second generation of mirrorless lenses. So it just makes a ton of sense for this particular video to be within this whole ecosystem. And there are a few reasons why having a smaller, lighter setup is pretty fantastic, especially for a wedding photographer or someone who is photographing 8, 10, 12 hours in a day. The first of which obviously is going to be just the overall weight of a camera like this. But for redundancy's sake, I always have two cameras on me at all times. That way, if something happens to either one of my cameras, I can grab the other one and continue to photograph what I'm doing. Especially at something like a wedding, you don't have the opportunity to redo a lot of those moments. And because I am carrying two cameras, that obviously is going to mean that I'm gonna need multiple lenses. But then it allows me to use complementary prime lenses on each camera body, which give me a wide angle lens on one body and a sort of telephoto-ish on another. One of my biggest goals at weddings is to have people feel comfortable around me. And so if you think of the classic wedding photographer that has like a battery grip and a bunch of zooms and flashes everywhere, that's gonna be a lot more intimidating than someone coming up to you with a camera and lens of this size. And then the thing that many of us just love, you get that really, really shallow, beautiful depth of field. Being able to separate your subject from the background and sort of create your own beautiful backdrop can definitely be something that can sort of save an image for you. Plus, when you're thinking about weddings, you're often thinking about dreamy and soft and things like that. And the shallow depth of field of something that is at 1.8 or 1.4 or 1.2 is definitely going to give you that look and feel. And it's just something that I basically just love to have in my toolkit. So as for building out an actual kit, a lot of it's going to depend on what type of wedding you are photographing and how versatile and flexible you need to be in that. That being said, I've always just found that the combination of a 35mm and an 85mm is pretty much just the best combination for many photographers, but I feel like both of these focal lengths are a little bit more forgiving, and pairing a 35, which is a semi-wide angle lens, with an 85, which is a semi-telephoto lens, just is a really, really good pair to be able to document things well. A 35 is wide enough that you can get the context of what's going on. That's why, it's a great photojournalistic kind of focal length. And then an 85 is just that classic portrait lens, but it's also great for things like speeches or moments during a ceremony where you need to get a little bit closer. And then both of these being f1.4 lenses makes it really, really easy to keep your two different cameras consistent with exposure, as you can just set each of them to whatever aperture you want and then set your shutter speeds the same. And then the thing about this 35 is that it is just so small and lightweight. And as a lens that you're gonna be using for probably more like a photojournalistic kind of look, it's not gonna be very intimidating to people, but you can also get a lot of really, really close detail with this as it focuses down to 0.27 meters or about 9 inches, which is very, very close and allows you to just kind of get up into things and get the whole feel of it all. And if you pair it with something like the A7R4 or even the A7 IV, you can actually pop this into APS-C mode if you want and get what is basically like a 50 millimeter-ish equivalent. And these cameras have enough megapixels in them that it can still work as a fantastic little portrait lens in a pinch. Now, the second pairing that I've started to gravitate more towards, but I think for most, and obviously I won't speak for everybody, but I feel like the combination of a 24 millimeter and a 50 millimeter is just a little bit more difficult and a little bit more advanced. The 24 is obviously going to be wider than the 35, and then the 50 is obviously going to be wider than the 85, which means you need to be a little bit more cautious of all of the other things that are going on in your scene. And I've used a lot of 24, 28, 35 millimeter, and honestly, this 24 G Master is one of my favorite lenses that I have used. And I know that this is like a sponsored video for Sony, and so obviously we're going to be talking about all the great things about their lenses. But one of the first things that I noticed right off the bat when I first pulled the Sony A1 gloriously out of its container and mounted the 24 1.4 G Master lens on it is, yeah, the Sony A1 is amazing, and it's honestly probably the best overall camera on the market right now. But this lens, it is almost 200 grams lighter than any other comparable 24 millimeter. And again, it's a native lens, so you also don't have to add an adapter or anything like that to use it. This thing is razor sharp corner to corner, because one of the things traditionally that you run into on wider angle lenses, and especially on faster wide angle lenses, is you get a lot of distortion and a lot of chromatic aberration, and a lot of smearing in the corners and all that kind of stuff. But this lens, even wide open at 1.4, was a phenomenal performer. And then pairing that 24 with this 50, which the 50 millimeter is just about the most classic focal length, that really shallow depth of field with a little bit more context. The amazing thing about this, again, is at 1.2, this thing is still super sharp. As many of you who have followed the channel know, I use a lot of 50 mil lenses, and a couple of things they're usually known for are having a dreamy look at 1.2, but also being a little bit soft and a little bit slow to focus. I found neither of those things to be the case with this 50 1.2 G Master, especially as many cameras like this A7R4, which is 60 megapixels, are just coming out with higher and higher megapixel counts. So one of the things that lens manufacturers have to do is try to make very, very unique elements to try and basically combat all of those imperfections that especially prime lenses at f1.2 and things like that run into. Sony has been putting what they call XA or extreme spherical elements into their lenses. And obviously I'm not a lens designer or any sort of engineer or anything like that, but looking at what that actually means and how incredibly precise they have to work to shape the light going through the glass in here to hit the sensors at the exact right spots is pretty fascinating. And I'll put a link down below to the page specifically talking about all of the different elements and how they design those things. I just know that these XA spherical elements are just way harder to produce and design and everything like that. And I believe, yeah, it says that the precision is kept to within 0.01 micron, which is absolutely ridiculous. But where you see that stuff is going to be in the lack of things like chromatic aberration or softness. And even in the bokeh specifically, they work to make the bokeh more smooth knowing that especially on a lens like the 50 1.2, you're gonna wanna shoot this lens at 1.2 for that very, very dreamy backdrop. But also at 1.2, this lens is very, very sharp and much more usable than a lot of the other lenses that I have used in the past wide open at something like an f1.2. So I would say the main two kind of kits for most people and where most photographers fall are in this 35-85 or a 24-50 setup. But there are a couple other lenses that I've been using that kind of accentuate what I consider to be like the mainstays of a wedding kit. The first of which is this tiny little 20 1.8 lens. So especially if you have a kit with a 35 and an 85, adding something like this 20mm to really get the expanse of it all, especially when you are photographing at places where the actual place is super important. I feel like having a really wide lens like this is something that's super helpful. And I always toss one of these lenses on my camera at the end of the day, and I photograph the dance party and all that kind of stuff. And the fact that it's so small and lightweight, it's just kind of an extra little bonus at the end of the day because your arms and shoulders and everything are probably gonna be a little bit tired. The second additional lens is the Sony 135 1.8 G Master lens. That lens is definitely fantastic for things like portraits. It's also super handy for those ceremonies or something that you just need that extra reach beyond something like an 85. And having a 1.8 aperture, especially for darker ceremonies or receptions or something, is again really, really useful. Then the last lens that is sort of just like the stereotypical staple of most wedding kits is just a classic 70-200 f2.8 with optical steady shot. And especially if you're doing larger weddings or ceremonies where you might be a little bit more restricted on your movements, having the versatility of a lens that doubles as a great portrait lens and also gives you the reach of 200mm, it just gives you the flexibility and the versatility to a lot of things in one lens, especially in a pinch. So overall, I was definitely super impressed with the performance and the size and everything of the entire Sony lens lineup. And I love that they've been putting out just so much stuff recently, especially the 20, the 24, the 35, and the 50. It's just super impressive how they're packing so much into these lenses while remaining small, lightweight, and honestly very cost effective. So thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions about any of this stuff in the comments down below. And I would love to know what lenses that you like to pair in your kits as well. So let me know what type of photography you do and what lenses you carry and why. Thanks again to Sony for sponsoring this video. I definitely really appreciate the support. And links to all of these lenses will be down in the description below in case you want to go and check them out for yourself. So thanks again. Subscribe if you haven't already. Give this video a like to help me out within the algorithm. And I will see you all on the next one.